Hashtag the human soldier woke up to find his unexpected reward, a beautiful alien slave. The stench of cheap liquor and cheaper perfume hung in the recycled air of the crucible like a persistent illness. Captain Jax Riley groaned as consciousness slowly returned to him, his head pounding with the unmistakable aftermath of Crisian bourbon, a drink that tasted like liquid fire going down and felt like nuclear fusion the morning after. The Crucible was aptly named, a lawless space station at the junction of three disputed territories where the dregs of a dozen species came to conduct business best kept in shadows. It was a melting pot of the galaxy's least reputable characters, a place where morality was as fluid as the contraband that flowed through its docking bays. Jax had been here 3 standard weeks, lying low after completing a job for the station's most dangerous and enigmatic crime lord, saving the life of Lord Forlag during an assassination attempt. The pay had been exceptional, the gratitude of the towering, 6-armed crime boss seemingly genuine. Jax had spent the previous night celebrating his good fortune at the Void, the station's most notorious drinking establishment. He opened his eyes cautiously, the harsh artificial lighting of his rented quarters stabbing into his retinas. Something was wrong. There was movement in his peripheral vision, someone in his room. Years of mercenary instinct kicked in, and his hand shot toward the blaster under his pillow. "Please, master. I mean no harm." The voice was soft, melodic, with an accent he couldn't place. Jax froze, then slowly turned his head toward the source. What he saw made him bolt upright despite his hangover. A woman, no, not human, knelt on the floor beside his bed. Her skin was a luminescent azure that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Long, silvery hair cascaded down her back, framing a face of otherworldly beauty. Her eyes were large, liquid pools of quicksilver that reflected the room's harsh lighting like twin moons. But what disturbed Jax most wasn't her alien beauty. It was the heavy metal collar around her slender neck and the gleaming chains that bound her wrists. She wore what could barely be called clothing. Thin strips of some metallic fabric strategically placed to maintain the barest modesty while emphasizing every curve of her lithe form. The outfit was clearly designed to humiliate and objectify. "Who the hell are you?" Jax demanded, his voice rough from sleep and alcohol. "And how did you get in here?" The woman kept her gaze downcast. "I am Lyra, master. Lord Forlag has gifted me to you as a token of his profound gratitude." Her voice trembled slightly. "I was delivered while you slept." Jax stared at her, horror and disgust washing over him. He'd spent 5 years in the Galactic Coalition forces before going freelance, fighting for the more ethically advanced regions of space. He'd seen slavery in the lawless zones, of course, but he'd never participated in it. The very concept revolted him. "I don't accept people as gifts," he said flatly, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "This is a mistake." For the first time, Lyra raised her eyes to meet his, and Jax was struck by the intelligence and fear he saw there. "Please, master, don't call me that." He cut her off. "My name is Jax." A flicker of confusion crossed her features. Captain Riley, refusing Lord Forlag's gift would be unwise. It would be considered a grievous insult. "I don't care. I'll talk to Forlag and straighten this out." Lyra's silver eyes widened with panic. "You cannot. To refuse me is to condemn me to death. Lord Forlag does not take back gifts. Those he deems worthless are disposed of." The words hung in the room like a toxic cloud. Jax cursed under his breath. He'd dealt with criminals across the galaxy, but the complex politics of crime, lords like Forlag were always tricky. A wrong move could mean death, not just for him, but apparently for this woman as well. "You're Xylosian, aren't you?" he asked, recognizing her species from his travels. The Xylosians were rare, their homeworld destroyed in the Cataclysm Wars. Those who survived were scattered, many ending up in situations exactly like this. Lyra nodded slightly. "Yes, Captain." "The empaths," he murmured, recalling what little he knew of her kind. Rumors said they could sense emotions, even thoughts sometimes. Such abilities made them valuable and vulnerable. Jax's moral compass and survival instinct warred within him. He couldn't keep her as a slave. That was unthinkable. But he couldn't simply release her on the crucible either. She'd be recaptured or killed within hours. He reached for the chains binding her wrists and began working on the locks with practiced fingers. "What are you doing?" Lyra asked, alarm evident in her voice. "Getting these off you," Jax replied as the first manacle fell away. No one deserves to be in chains. Once her wrists were free, he examined the collar at her neck. It was different, more technological than decorative. A small panel of lights pulsed steadily at its center. "This is an inhibitor collar," he realized aloud. "Yes," she confirmed quietly. "It must remain. For now." Jax frowned, but nodded his understanding. Inhibitor collars were used to suppress abilities in various species. Removing it improperly could cause pain or worse. And beyond that, its presence would maintain the illusion that Lyra remained his property in the eyes of others. "I need to think," he said, standing and moving to the small refreshment unit in the corner of his quarters. He poured 2 cups of water, handed one to Lyra, and downed his own in one long gulp. "Thank you," she said, taking the cup with hands that trembled slightly. She remained kneeling on the floor. "You can sit on a chair, you know," Jax said, gesturing to the modest furnishings of his rented room. Lyra hesitated, then slowly rose and perched on the edge of a metal chair, her posture rigid with tension. "How long were you with Forlag?" Jax asked. 3 standard years, she replied, her voice barely audible. Jax cursed again. "And before that?" "Other masters. I was taken from my people when I was young." Her matter-of-fact tone made the statement all the more heartbreaking. Jax felt a surge of protective anger that surprised him with its intensity. "I'm going to help you," he decided aloud. "But we need to be smart about this. For now, we maintain appearances. If anyone asks, you're my property." The word tasted foul in his mouth. "But between us, you're under my protection, not my ownership. Understand?" A flicker of something, hope, perhaps, crossed Lyra's face before she masked it. "Yes, Captain Riley." "Jax," he corrected again. "Just Jax." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Jax felt as though she was seeing straight through to his core, a sensation both unsettling and strangely intimate. Then Lyra looked away, and the moment passed. "Just Jax," she repeated softly, like she was testing the shape of the words on her tongue. Jax realized with uncomfortable clarity that his life had just become infinitely more complicated. The marketplace level of the Crucible was a chaotic blend of legitimate commerce and shadowy deals, all conducted under the disinterested gaze of security droids programmed to intervene only in the most extreme circumstances. Jax moved through the crowded pathways with practiced ease, Lyra following closely behind him. He'd given her his spare jacket to wear over the degrading outfit she'd arrived in, a small act of defiance and decency. Now, they were headed to acquire more suitable clothing for her, a necessity that would also serve as a test of their public dynamic. "Stay close," he murmured over his shoulder. "Don't make eye contact with anyone." "Yes, Jax," she replied softly, though he noticed how her gaze remained alert, scanning their surroundings with subtle efficiency. They passed stalls selling everything from illegally modified weapons to exotic fruits from a dozen worlds. The air was thick with the sense of cooking food, unwashed bodies, and mechanical fluids. Species from across the known galaxy haggled, threatened, and bartered in a cacophony of languages. Jax felt the eyes on them, or more specifically, on Lyra. Her beauty and the inhibitor collar marking her status made her a target for interest, both commercial and predatory. He found himself moving closer to her, one hand never far from his blaster. At a clothing stall run by a wrinkled Hexterian with too many eyes, Jax purchased practical garments, loose trousers, tunics, and a hooded cloak that could help conceal Lyra's distinctive features when needed. Throughout the transaction, he maintained a carefully neutral expression, treating the purchase as a simple necessity rather than the significant gesture it represented. "You treat property well," the Hexterian observed in clicking basic as they concluded their business. Surprising for a human. Jax merely grunted in response, taking the package and turning away. As they moved back into the flow of the marketplace, he noticed a hulking figure watching them from the shadows of a service corridor. A reptilian with mottled green scales and cold, unblinking eyes. Recognition flashed through Jax's mind. Krell, Forlag's feared enforcer. The reptilian made no move to approach, merely observed with predatory stillness before disappearing into the crowds. The message was clear. They were being watched. "We're being followed," Lyra whispered, confirming what Jax already knew. "You noticed our scaly friend too?" "Him and others," she replied. "Two near the junction we passed, another at the beverage stall." Jax raised an eyebrow, impressed. Either she was exceptionally observant, or she had other ways of sensing their watchers. He needed to be careful not to underestimate her. Back in the relative safety of his quarters, Jax secured the door with additional encryption and turned to find Lyra standing uncertainly in the center of the room, still wearing his oversized jacket. "Here," he said, handing her the clothing package. "There's a sanitation unit through there. You can change." Lyra took the package with a look of genuine surprise. "Thank you," she said, the words weighted with more meaning than the simple courtesy suggested. While she changed, Jax attempted to contact Forlag through his secure comm channel, hoping to negotiate some diplomatic solution. As expected, his message went unanswered. Crime lords didn't discuss their gifts once bestowed. When Lyra emerged, the transformation was subtle but significant. Dressed in the simple gray tunic and trousers, with her silver hair braided back, she looked less like exotic property and more like a person. Still beautiful, still bearing the inhibitor collar, but with a restored dignity that straightened her posture and lifted her chin slightly. "Better?" Jax asked. "Yes," she replied simply, then after a pause, added, "No one has given me proper clothing in a very long time." The statement hung between them, another reminder of the life she'd endured. Jax felt a fresh surge of anger toward Forlag and all those who participated in such practices. "Do you have a plan?" Lyra asked, interrupting his thoughts. "Working on it," Jax admitted. "My ship is docked in a maintenance bay on the station's lower ring, currently undergoing repairs. Once it's flight-ready, we could leave, but Forlag controls all departure clearances from the Crucible," Lyra finished for him. "And attempting to leave without proper authorization would trigger automated defense systems." Jax nodded, impressed again by her knowledge. "You've been paying attention during your time here." "Observation is survival," she said simply. They spent the rest of the day in tense conversation, with Jax attempting to gather information about Forlag's operation and Lyra providing what limited insight she could. She was careful with her words, sharing fragments about her captivity, but revealing little about her origins or abilities. Trust was a luxury neither of them could afford yet. That night, Jax insisted Lyra take the bed while he made a makeshift pallet on the floor. The arrangement clearly confused her. "You do not wish to use me?" she asked bluntly as Jax settled onto his improvised bedding. The question sent a wave of discomfort through him. "No," he said firmly. "That's not why you're here." "Then why am I here, Jax Riley?" Her silver eyes seemed to glow in the dimmed lighting. "Why risk Forlag's wrath for someone you do not know?" Jax considered the question seriously. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. "And there's damned little of that left in this part of space." Something in Lyra's expression softened. "You are unusual." "So I've been told," Jax replied dryly. As they settled into uneasy sleep, neither noticed the small monitoring device that had been planted during their absence, silently transmitting their every word to interested parties. The following morning brought an unwelcome visitor. Jax was reviewing ship repair schedules on his datapad when a heavy pounding at the door interrupted his concentration. Lyra, who had been sitting quietly by the room's single viewport, tensed visibly. "Security override in progress," announced the room's automated system. Jax reached for his blaster, but before he could move toward a defensive position, the door slid open to reveal the massive form of Krell, Forlag's reptilian enforcer. Behind him stood two armed guards, their weapons not drawn but prominently displayed. "Captain Riley," Krell rumbled, his voice a bass vibration that seemed to resonate in Jax's chest. "Lord Forlag sends his regards." Does he now? Jax kept his tone neutral, though his pulse quickened. Funny, he hasn't answered my messages. Krell's vertically slitted pupils narrowed. The Lord does not engage in reconsideration of his generosity. His cold gaze shifted to Lyra, who had lowered her eyes submissively. I see his gift is in good condition. She's fine, Jack said tersely. Was there something specific you wanted, or is this just a social call? The reptilian's scaled lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. Just ensuring everything is satisfactory. Lord Forlag values your services and hopes you will continue to be available for future assignments. The threat was thinly veiled. Keep the gift, stay in Forlag's good graces, or face consequences. Tell your boss, I appreciate his generosity. Jax forced out the words. Now if you'll excuse us. Of course, Krell interrupted, his heavy tail swishing across the threshold as he stepped back. Enjoy your time on the Crucible, Captain. We're always watching over our valued associates. The door slid shut, but the menace lingered in the room like a toxic gas. He knows, Lyra said quietly. He suspects your intentions. Probably, Jax agreed, holstering his blaster. Which means we need to move faster than planned. Over the next few days, they established a cautious routine. Jax continued his normal activities on the station, making contacts and gathering information while pretending to enjoy his reward. Lyra accompanied him when necessary, playing her role with practiced precision in public while gradually revealing more of her true self in private. Small details emerged. She had a quick, analytical mind and a dry sense of humor that surfaced in rare, unguarded moments. She could speak 4 languages fluently and had an encyclopedic knowledge of space station layouts and security protocols. She never spoke of her family or home, and Jax didn't press her on these matters. Some wounds were too deep to probe. Their movements around the station became increasingly complicated as Jax noticed more of Forlag's people watching them. Several times, Lyra subtly guided him away from corridors or gathering places moments before security sweeps or confrontations erupted. When questioned, she attributed it to observation or intuition, but Jax suspected there was more to her abilities than she admitted. The turning point came during an excursion to the docking ring to check on Jax's ship repairs. They were passing through a rarely used maintenance corridor when Lyra suddenly grabbed Jax's arm, pulling him into a recessed doorway. What? He began, but she pressed a finger to his lips, her eyes wide with warning. Seconds later, 3 rough-looking mercenaries, 2 humans and a burly draconid, passed by their hiding place, weapons drawn. Swear I saw them come this way, one was saying. Forlag's offering 5,000 credits for information on their movements. Why not just take them directly? Asked another. 10,000 for the woman returned unharmed, no questions asked. Because Forlag wants to know if Riley's loyal first, replied the third. But I say we skip the politics and go straight for the credits. Their voices faded as they moved further down the corridor. Jax turned to Lyra, who was pressed against him in the narrow space, her breathing rapid. How did you know? He demanded in a whisper. She hesitated, then admitted. I felt their intent. Their hunger. Empathic abilities. Jax confirmed what he'd suspected. That's what the collar suppresses. Partially, she acknowledged, then fell silent. They made their way back to their quarters by an alternative route, narrowly avoiding another group of bounty hunters. Once safely inside, Jax pressed for more information. What else can you do, Lyra? What aren't you telling me? She stood by the viewport, her back to him, shoulders tense. Why does it matter? Because we're in this together now, he replied. And because whatever abilities you have might be the difference between survival and capture. Lyra turned slowly, her silver eyes troubled. The Xylosians are not merely empaths, Jax. That's what outsiders believe, what we allow them to believe. And the truth. She extended her hand, palm up. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as Jax watched in astonishment, his datapad rose from the table and floated gently across the room to hover above her outstretched hand. Telekinesis, he breathed. The datapad immediately dropped into her palm, and Lyra winced, her free hand going to the inhibitor collar. Limited while this remains. But yes, that's why Forelag kept you collared, Jax realized, and why you're so valuable. And so dangerous, she added quietly. My abilities were inconsistent under Forelag's ownership. He considered me defective, unpredictable, too risky to keep, too valuable to destroy. So he gave you to me, Jax concluded, as a test of my loyalty and a potential liability all in one package. Lyra nodded, setting the datapad down. The inhibitor doesn't completely block my abilities. It was calibrated for a full-blooded Xylosian, and I am not entirely pure in my lineage. Small empathic readings still come through. Occasional telekinetic bursts when emotions run high. But using them causes pain. Jax crossed the room to stand before her, studying the collar more carefully. We need to get this off you. Not here, she warned. The inhibitors have tracking functions and deadman switches. Tampering triggers alerts. And consequences. Then we need to leave the crucible, Jax decided. Soon, that night, as Jax lay on his pallet trying to formulate a plan, Lyra's voice came softly through the darkness. Why are you helping me, truly? She asked. You could have maintained the pretense, kept me as Forelag intended, avoided all this danger. Jax stared at the ceiling, considering his answer. When I was younger, serving in the Coalition forces, my unit liberated a mining colony in the Andaran system. The owners had been using indentured workers, entire families kept in perpetual debt. We found children who'd never seen sunlight, adults who'd never known freedom. He paused, the memories still vivid. I promised myself then that I'd never turn a blind eye to slavery, no matter what form it took, even when helping comes at great personal risk. Especially then, Jax replied. Otherwise, the promise means nothing. The silence stretched between them, comfortable this time rather than tense. Thank you, Jax Riley, Lyra said finally, for seeing me as a person worth that risk. Something shifted in Jax's chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in years, fragile but undeniable. He knew he was developing feelings for Lyra that went beyond protection or duty, but the power imbalance between them made any such emotion complicated at best, exploitative at worst. He pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on their survival. Get some sleep, he told her. Tomorrow we start planning our escape in earnest. The next day, Jax reached out to his network of contacts on the Crucible, discreetly gathering information about security protocols and possible exit strategies. He learned that in 3 days, the station would conduct a quarterly solar flare drill, a procedure that temporarily disrupted certain security systems and created a brief window of reduced surveillance. It was their best chance, but they still needed a way to deactivate Lyra's inhibitor collar without triggering its safeguards. For that, they needed specialized knowledge and equipment that only one person on the station might provide. It's like an information broker with a personal vendetta against Forelag. Making contact with Slyke was dangerous. The diminutive Felorian operated from the station's lowest levels, surrounded by security measures, both technological and biological. Jax had to go alone, leaving Lyra secured in their quarters with emergency escape instructions if he didn't return. Slyke's office was a converted storage bay, its entrance guarded by 2 hulking droids programmed for extreme violence. Inside, amidst a chaotic collection of data terminals and contraband technology, sat the broker himself, barely a meter tall, with iridescent skin and enormous compound eyes that missed nothing. Captain Riley, Slyke greeted him, his voice surprisingly deep for his size. What brings Forelag's new favorite pet to my humble establishment? Jax concealed his surprise at being recognized. Information, he replied simply. At the right price. All information has a price, Slyke agreed. But some costs more than credits. He gestured to a chair across from his cluttered desk. Seed, tell me what you seek. Jax remained standing. Inhibitor collar bypass codes. Xylosian specific. Slyke's compound eyes flashed with interest. Ah, the blue beauty Forelag gifted you. Already tired of the restrictions. Can you help or not? Jax demanded, unwilling to engage in the broker's games. Perhaps. Slyke's small hands danced over a terminal. Xylosion inhibitors are XN, 7 series, military grade. Bypass codes exist, but are specific to each unit's serial number. I can get you the serial number. That won't be enough, Slyke countered. I require incentive to risk Forlag's displeasure. He and I have history, you understand. Name your price, Jack said, though he knew it wouldn't be credits. Slyke's lipless mouth formed what might have been a smile. The data you recovered during your last mission for Forlag. The encrypted communications from the Hegemony ambassador. Jax froze. That data was the only reason Forlag had spared the ambassador's life. Leverage for future negotiations. Handing it to Slyke would be a direct betrayal of his employer, guaranteeing Forlag's murderous wrath. Those files are locked in Forlag's secure servers, he lied. Don't insult me, Captain, Slyke replied. You always keep insurance copies of sensitive materials. It's why you've survived this long. He leaned forward. My offer is simple. Your insurance policy for the Xylosian's freedom from her collar. A fair trade, I think. Jax hesitated, weighing their options. Without the bypass codes, removing Lyra's collar would be impossible without causing her severe injury or worse. With no other alternatives, he reluctantly reached into his jacket and produced a small data chip. If Forlag traces this back to me, he won't, Slyke assured him, snatching the chip with surprising speed. Our transaction never occurred. You never visited my establishment. He connected the chip to his terminal, quickly verifying its contents before nodding in satisfaction. The codes will be delivered to your quarters tonight, hidden in a maintenance droid's routine diagnostic report. How do I know you won't sell us out? Jax asked. Slyke's eyes gleamed. Because Forlag stole something precious from me once. Anything that causes him pain brings me pleasure. He waved a dismissive hand. Now go. We're finished here. Jax left the broker's den with a mix of relief and dread. He'd secured a crucial component for their escape, but at the cost of making himself a certain target for Forlag's vengeance. There would be no going back now. When he returned to their quarters, he found Lyra in a state of agitation. 2 of Forlag's guards came while you were gone, she told him. They didn't enter, just scanned the door and left. I think they were checking if I was still here. They're getting suspicious, Jax confirmed. But we have what we need. He explained his meeting with Slyke and the promised bypass codes. The solar flare drill is in 2 days. Once we have the codes, we'll move during the drill, get to my ship, and be gone before Forlag realizes what's happening. Lyra shook her head, concern evident in her features. Your ship is still in the maintenance bay. Even with systems temporarily down, we'll have to pass multiple security checkpoints. I'm working on that too, Jax assured her. My ship, the Nomad, has been cleared for a diagnostic engine, firing tomorrow. I've bribed the maintenance chief to reclassify it as flight-ready in the system. By the time the drill starts, we'll have departure clearance already in the automated system. And Forlag's personal security forces will be busy with their own drill protocols. Jax pulled up a station map on his datapad. We'll take this service route through the maintenance tunnels. It's longer, but avoids the main corridors where most guards will be stationed. As they refined their plan throughout the evening, Jax noticed Lyra watching him with an intensity that made him self-conscious. What? He finally asked. You're risking everything, she said softly. Your reputation, your future contracts, your life, all for someone you barely know. Jax shrugged uncomfortably. Maybe I'm just tired of playing by their rules. Or maybe, Lyra suggested, moving closer to him, there are some things worth fighting for that have nothing to do with credits or contracts. Their eyes met, and Jax felt that same connection he'd experienced before, a sensation of being understood on a level beyond words. Whether it was her empathic abilities or something more fundamental between them, he couldn't say. Lyra, he began, but was interrupted by the soft chime of the maintenance droid arriving for its scheduled diagnostic. Within its routine report, as promised, they found the bypass codes for the inhibitor collar, a complex string of alphanumerics that might finally give Lyra true freedom. They spent the remainder of the night finalizing their preparations, gathering the few possessions they would take, and going over contingencies. The plan was risky but sound. If all went well, by this time tomorrow, they would be in hyperspace, beyond Forlag's immediate reach. As they finished their preparations, an unexpected moment of vulnerability arose. Sitting side by side on the edge of the bed, reviewing the escape route one final time, Lyra suddenly placed her hand over Jax's. "If we succeed tomorrow," she said quietly, "I will be free for the first time in 15 years. The magnitude of that statement hit Jax like a physical blow. "We will succeed," he promised, though he knew better than to guarantee outcomes in their dangerous reality. "And after?" she asked, her silver eyes searching his face. "What then?" It was the question Jax had been avoiding. In the intensity of planning their escape, he hadn't allowed himself to consider what came after. Freedom for Lyra, certainly, but what did that mean for them? "That would be your choice," he said carefully. "You'll be free to go wherever you want, do whatever you choose." "And if I choose to stay with you?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities. Jax felt his resolve weaken. He'd been fighting his growing feelings, telling himself it was inappropriate given their circumstances. But here, on the eve of either freedom or disaster, honesty seemed the only acceptable currency. "I'd like that," he admitted softly. "More than I probably should." The space between them disappeared as Lyra leaned forward, her lips meeting his in a kiss that carried both gentleness and certainty. Jax responded with carefully restrained passion, acutely aware of their complex dynamic even in this intimate moment. When they separated, Lyra's expression was resolute. "Tomorrow we fight for freedom," she said, "and then we decide what that freedom means for both of us." Jax nodded, unable to find adequate words for the mix of emotions coursing through him. Hope, fear, determination, and something deeper that he wasn't ready to name. They spent their final night on the crucible side by side, not as master and slave, not even as rescuer and rescued, but as equals facing an uncertain future together. The day of reckoning arrived with the mechanical precision of station time. No sunrise, no natural markers, just the abrupt shift from night cycle to day cycle lighting. Jax woke early, checking and rechecking their minimal supplies and the small holdout blaster he'd acquired for Lyra. The solar flare drill was scheduled for 1400 station time, providing a 20-minute window of reduced security. Their plan was to begin removing Lyra's inhibitor collar at precisely 1355, timing it so that when the collar's tracking system went offline, the station-wide communications disruption of the drill would mask any alert signals. As the appointed time approached, Jax could feel tension building in his body, the familiar pre-mission awareness that had kept him alive through countless dangerous situations. Lyra, by contrast, appeared outwardly calm, though the rigid set of her shoulders betrayed her anxiety. "Are you ready?" he asked, checking the chronometer for the dozenth time. She nodded, tilting her head to provide better access to the collar's control panel. "Whatever happens, Jax, thank you for trying. Save your thanks for when we're in hyperspace," he replied, forcing a confidence into his voice that he didn't entirely feel. At exactly 1355, Jax began the delicate process of entering the bypass codes into the collar's hidden interface. The sequence was complex, requiring precise timing between inputs. One mistake would trigger the collar's defense mechanisms, with potentially lethal consequences for Lyra. As he worked, sweat beading on his forehead, the station's announcement system crackled to life. "Attention all personnel. Solar flare drill commencing in 3 minutes. Proceed to designated safety zones and prepare for communications blackout." Jax's fingers never paused in their careful dance across the collar's interface. 2 more sequences, then one final confirmation code. The collar emitted a soft beep, and the pulsing lights at its center changed from red to green. "Command accepted," announced a synthetic voice from the device. Inhibitor disengaging in 5, 4, 3. The door to their quarters exploded inward in a shower of metal and sparks. Krell stood in the smoking entry, flanked by a half-dozen armed guards, their weapons trained on Jax and Lyra. Behind them, partially obscured, stood the small form of Slyke, his compound eyes gleaming with malice. 2, 1. Inhibitor disengaged. The collar completed its countdown, falling open and dropping from Lyra's neck just as chaos erupted. "Traitors!" Krell snarled, raising his heavy blaster. Lord Forlag sends his final regards. Jax dived for his weapon as the first shots sizzled through the air where he'd been standing. The station alarms began blaring, the solar flare drill now providing real cover for the violence unfolding. "Lyra, run!" Jax shouted, returning fire from behind the overturned bed. But Lyra wasn't running. Free from the inhibitor collar for the first time in years, she stood with an unnatural stillness at the center of the maelstrom. Her silver eyes had taken on a luminous quality, and her azure skin seemed to pulse with inner light. One of Krell's guards fired directly at her, a killing shot that should have ended everything. The energy bolt stopped mid-air, hovering impossibly before dispersing into harmless particles. "Enough," Lyra said, her voice resonating with newfound power. With a gesture that seemed almost casual, she sent 3 guards flying backward into the corridor wall with bone-crushing force. The remaining guards froze, their weapons wavering with uncertainty. "Keep firing," Krell roared, his own blaster discharging a barrage of energy bolts toward Lyra. She deflected them with subtle movements of her hands, her telekinetic abilities flowing through her with increasing confidence. Each deflected shot ricocheted into walls or ceiling panels, creating a chaotic storm of energy and debris. Jax seized the opportunity, firing his own weapon at the distracted guards. 2 fell before the others could react. Slyke, seeing the tide turning, had already vanished back into the corridor. The maintenance tunnels. "Now!" Jax shouted, grabbing their small pack of supplies. Lyra nodded, backing toward the room's emergency exit panel. With a focused gesture, she tore the panel free and flung it directly at Krell. The massive reptilian dodged, but the distraction gave Jax and Lyra precious seconds to disappear into the narrow maintenance shaft beyond. The alarms continued to wail throughout the station as they navigated the claustrophobic tunnels. The solar flare drill had become real chaos, with security personnel responding to multiple emergencies, including their escape. "How do you feel?" Jax asked as they paused at a junction, checking his datapad map. Lyra flexed her fingers, a look of wonder on her face. "Like I've been underwater for years and finally surfaced." Her eyes met his, bright with emotion. "It's overwhelming, but exhilarating." "Save some of that exhilaration," Jax advised. "We're not clear yet. The Nomad is 2 levels down, base 17. They continued through the labyrinthine service tunnels, forced to detour twice when they encountered emergency repair crews. Lyra proved invaluable, sensing the presence of others before they came into view and creating distractions with her telekinesis when necessary. As they neared the maintenance docking bay, Jax's comm device chirped with an emergency broadcast. "All security personnel, lock down all transportation bays. Repeat, full lockdown of all transportation facilities. Fugitives identified, human male and Xylosian female, considered armed and extremely dangerous." "Forlag's mobilizing everything he has," Jax muttered, pocketing the device. "We need to move faster." They emerged from the maintenance tunnel into a service corridor just 1 level above the docking bay. As they rounded a corner, they found their path blocked by a security checkpoint that hadn't been on Jax's outdated map, for armed guards and an automated weapons system had been hastily deployed. "Back," Jax hissed, pulling Lyra into a recessed doorway. "We'll find another." "No," Lyra interrupted, her expression determined. "We don't have time. Let me handle this." Before Jax could protest, she stepped out into the corridor, facing the checkpoint directly. The guards immediately raised their weapons, shouting commands to halt. Lyra raised both hands, and the air around her seemed to ripple with energy. The automated weapon system sparked and went offline. The guards' weapons were torn from their hands, hovering in midair before disassembling themselves, pieces clattering harmlessly to the floor. With another gesture, the guards themselves were immobilized, not harmed, but held in place as if by invisible restraints. "We don't want to hurt you," she told them calmly. "We just want to leave." Jax emerged from hiding, impressed, and slightly unnerved by the display of power. Together, they moved past the checkpoint, Lyra releasing her hold on the guards only when they were safely beyond reach. That was new, Jax commented as they hurried down the corridor. I'm remembering, Lyra explained between quick breaths. Skills I was trained in before my capture. They're coming back. Not completely, but enough. They reached the final access door to the maintenance docking bay where the Nomad waited. Through the small viewport, Jax could see his ship, a compact, heavily modified transport vessel that had been his home for the past 7 years. It looked ready for flight, but the bay itself was not empty as he'd hoped. Krell stood on the docking platform, having somehow anticipated their route. Beside him were 6 armed guards, all with weapons trained on the access door. The reptilian's scales gleamed under the bay lights, his expression one of cold anticipation. He must have taken a direct route, Jax whispered, ducking back from the viewport. They're waiting for us. Lyra peered through the view panel briefly. 7 armed opponents, plus whatever reinforcements they can call. We're running out of time before the station returns to full security functionality. We need a diversion, Jax said, checking his blaster charge, nearly depleted after their earlier firefight. Lyra was quiet for a moment, her silver eyes distant, as if calculating possibilities. I can create one, but it will take most of my strength. I've been suppressed too long to maintain this level of ability without strain. What do you need me to do? Get to the ship and start the launch sequence. When you see your opportunity, be ready to move fast. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but firm. Trust me, Jax. Their eyes met in a moment of silent communication. Then Jax nodded. I trust you. Lyra took a deep breath, centering herself. Open the door on my signal. She closed her eyes, hands outstretched, fingers moving in complex patterns as if weaving invisible threads. Jax watched in fascination as the air around her began to shimmer with energy, her azure skin glowing with an inner light that pulsed in rhythm with her breathing. Now, she whispered. Jax hit the door release, and chaos erupted in the docking bay. All the lights exploded simultaneously, plunging the bay into darkness broken only by emergency strips along the floor. Alarms blared as oxygen pressure warnings activated. Something massive, later Jax would realize it was a cargo loader, tore free from its moorings and crashed across the bay, forcing Krell and his guards to scatter. In the confusion, Lyra seized Jax's hand. Run! They sprinted across the bay toward the Nomad, using the darkness and chaos as cover. Blaster fire erupted sporadically, shots going wild in the confusion. Jax felt the heat of a near-miss singe his jacket, but kept moving. They reached the ship's ramp just as emergency lighting flickered on. Krell, having recovered from the initial shock, spotted them and roared a command to his guards. Blaster fire concentrated on their position, impacting the ship's already battered hull. Get inside and power up, Lyra shouted over the din. I'll hold them back. Jax hesitated for only a second before racing up the ramp into his ship. He threw himself into the pilot's seat, fingers flying over the controls in the startup sequence he'd performed countless times. The engines hummed to life, reassuringly powerful despite their recent repairs. Through the viewport, he could see Lyra at the base of the ramp, her slender form silhouetted against the chaos of the bay. She stood with arms extended, creating what appeared to be a shield of energy that deflected the incoming blaster fire. But Jax could see her strength waning, each impact causing her to stagger slightly. Krell was advancing methodically, his massive blaster cutting through Lyra's defenses more effectively than the others. The reptilian's face was twisted in a snarl of determination. The Nomad's engines reached full power. Jax slammed his hand down on the external ramp control, then threw open the side hatch. Lyra, now! She turned and ran for the hatch, her shield faltering as she redirected her remaining energy to speed. A blaster bolt grazed her shoulder, spinning her halfway around, but she recovered and leapt for the open hatch. Jax caught her arm, pulling her inside as Krell closed in. The reptilian's massive clawed hand actually caught the edge of the hatch as it was closing, powerful muscles straining to prevent the seal. For a moment, it seemed he might succeed through sheer physical strength. Lyra, despite her injury, made a final gesture. Krell was thrown backward as if struck by an invisible battering ram, his body slamming into the far wall of the bay. The hatch sealed with a reassuring hiss of pressurization. Jax was already back at the controls, overriding the docking clamps and initiating launch procedures. Unauthorized departure detected, announced the station's automated system. Security lockdown initiating. Heavy blast doors began closing over the bay's space access port. If they sealed completely, the Nomad would be trapped. "Hold on," Jax shouted, ramming the throttle forward. The ship lurched, breaking free of the last moorings and shooting toward the narrowing gap. Metal screamed against metal as the Nomad's hull scraped through the partially closed doors, leaving a trail of sparks and debris. Then they were free, the vastness of space opening before them. The Crucible reseated behind, its defense systems already tracking and targeting their unauthorized departure. "Preparing for hyperspace jump," Jax announced, fingers dancing over the navicomputer. "They'll have interceptors launched within minutes." Lyra collapsed into the co-pilot's seat, pale from exertion, and the blaster wound on her shoulder. "Can we outrun them?" "We won't have to," Jax replied with grim satisfaction as the hyperspace calculations completed. "Hold tight." The stars elongated around them as the Nomad leapt into hyperspace, leaving the Crucible and Forlag's vengeance behind, at least temporarily. The familiar blue tunnel of hyperspace enveloped the ship, the peculiar silence that always followed a jump settling around them. Jax let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, then turned to Lyra. "Let me see that shoulder." The wound wasn't deep, but it needed treatment. In the ship's small medical bay, Jax cleaned and bandaged it with practiced efficiency, having tended his own injuries many times over the years. "Where are we going?" Lyra asked as he finished, her voice weary but steady. "Neutral territory," Jax explained. "A trading outpost in the Viridian system. It's independent, no extradition agreements with any of the major powers, including Forlag Syndicate. We can rest there, plan our next move." "Our next move," Lyra repeated softly, testing the phrase. "That sounds nice." Jax sat beside her on the medical cot. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the reality of their situation was setting in. They were fugitives from one of the most powerful crime lords in the sector. Forlag's reach was long, his memory for slights even longer. "I won't lie to you," Jax said. "It won't be easy. Forlag won't stop hunting us, hunting you, just because we escaped the Crucible." "I know," Lyra replied, "but difficulty is preferable to captivity." She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "For the first time in 15 years, I can choose my own path. That's worth any risk." Jax looked down at their joined hands, hers delicate but strong, the azure skin no longer marred by chains or collar. "What will you do with that freedom?" Lyra considered the question seriously. "First, I need to relearn who I am without restraints, both physical and mental. My abilities are returning, but they're raw, unpredictable." "I noticed," Jax said with a slight smile. "That was quite a display back there." "It was reckless," she admitted. "Proper training would have accomplished the same with half the energy expenditure. I have much to relearn." And after that, Lyra's silver eyes met his, serious but warm. "There are others like me, Jax. Other Xylosians in captivity. Not many. We were never numerous, even before the Cataclysm. But they exist. Perhaps I could help them." The idea resonated with something deep in Jax's own beliefs, the same impulse that had driven him to help Lyra in the first place. "That wouldn't be an easy path either." "No," she agreed, "but it would be meaningful." She hesitated, then added, "I would understand if you wish to part ways once we reach safety. You've already risked everything for me." "No," Jax interrupted, his decision already made. "My ship, my skills, they're yours if you want them. This cause, it's worth fighting for." The smile that spread across Lyra's face was like sunrise after the longest night. Brilliant, warm, full of promise. Then we have much planning to do, Captain Riley. Just Jax, he reminded her, returning her smile. Just Jax, she repeated, leaning closer to him. Their kiss was different this time, not shadowed by impending danger or uncertain futures, but illuminated by shared purpose and growing trust. When they separated, both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. In the cockpit, the hyperspace readout continued its countdown to their destination. The Nomad carried them further from their past with each moment, toward a future neither could fully predict, but both had chosen freely. For Jax Riley, former mercenary turned liberator, and Lyra, once a slave, now finding her true power, it was enough. The galaxy was vast, Forlag's reach was long, and the path ahead would not be easy. But they were free, they were together, and for the first time in a very long time, they both had something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. As the Nomad carried them through the ethereal tunnel of hyperspace, that knowledge was more precious than any payment, any reward, any treasure in the known universe.